Hello Internet. One day, electric vehicles will be the norm.
Now you're probably already typing into the comments how I'm wrong, how electric vehicles will never catch on, how the batteries degrade, how EVs are a scam, blah, blah, blah. But I hate to break it to the anti-EV crowd, but it's a fact. Electric vehicles will become the norm, and I can prove it to you. First off, there's that tiny little undeniable fact that even the most Jeremy Clarkson-loving, V8 worshipping petrolhead cannot deny.
That the oil from which petrol and diesel is made of will run out. It's a fossil fuel.
And some of you may argue, rightly, that we still have oil for generations to come, given our current consumption of fuel. But don't forget that many developed nations are going to prohibit the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in about 10 or 15 years. And when that happens, car makers want to, stay in business. And for that, they're going to have to come up with something else. So, what are the alternatives?
Some may say biofuel. For those who don't know, at least, applied to cars, biofuel is petrol and diesel made from biomass. So it might be corn, it might be sugarcane, yeah. Thing is, I did a sort of a back of an envelope calculation. Here it is, you can pause and look at it if you like, you can look at all the sources, but it's more or less well-based. And my conclusion was,
if you use all the arable land in the world to make biofuel, so that means you're not growing any more vegetables or fruit or anything, or corn or cereals, whatever, you're just growing fuel, that will be enough for just over 1.5 days of our current fuel consumption.
Now, even if my calculation is wrong and I'm off by a factor of, let's say, 100, that would still mean that all of the arable land in the world would not be enough for a year's worth of fuel for our cars.
So I think we can safely say that biofuel is not going to be the alternative we're looking for. And of course, we cannot forget the evergreen solution that is hydrogen. Everyone who hates electric vehicles and loves petrol always goes for the hydrogen as the solution, as the future. Hydrogen will save us all, will be everything, it'll be perfect. Well, here is Jack Nicholson in 1978 already purporting hydrogen to be the future. So it would seem the future takes a long time to arrive. And then of course we have a 2008 episode of Top Gear,
where again they purported hydrogen to be the panacea to all motoring related issues regarding fuel and whatnot. And of course that episode aged as well as milk. The BBC don't even have it on their official YouTube channel when they used to. I wonder why. The fuel cell vehicle they showed in the episode, the Honda FCX Clarity, was rather unique, and you could only lease it because the fuel cell in it was incredibly expensive. And basically it's just an electric vehicle which doesn't get its electricity from the grid, but rather you have to find hydrogen, which is usually stuck to other things, otherwise it would float off into space, have an energy intensive process where you separate the hydrogen from whatever it is it's stuck to, and then find a way of compressing it, storing it, and then pumping it into a tank in a car. So basically it's just an electric vehicle, but with a bigger show and dance surrounding how you get that electricity.
Since that episode has aired, electric vehicles have become more or less commonplace.
In fact, here I am on the motorway, and I'm going to count to 3 and see how many electric vehicles I see. 1, 2, 3. How's a Tesla? I saw an electric vehicle within 5 seconds, but I didn't see a hydrogen car. That's the point.
So without any viable alternatives, and considering the ban on petrol and diesel, or, if that doesn't happen, the exhausting of our fossil fuel reserves, and also taking into account there probably won't be like a miraculous scientific breakthrough that allows cars to run on magic, electric vehicles are the future. But don't cry into your cornflakes just yet. It's not all bad. Electric vehicles have a lot of advantages. They are clean because they don't fart out noxious gases that pollute the very air we breathe. They're quick. They're quiet. They require less maintenance in principle. They're cheaper to run in principle. They also can take electricity from any source. It might be hydro, wind, coal, solar, doesn't matter. Internal combustion engine vehicles are very picky about the kind of fuel they're able to burn. Also, in principle, you can get electricity from anywhere. I mean, if you're in a town, you've got lights, traffic lights, there are sockets all over the place, basically. So let us assume that electric vehicles do become the norm in a short period of time. They're the most common form of vehicle on the road. What then? It will probably suck in ways that people don't foresee right now. And that's what this video is about. Now, I have a confession to make. It's not anything dramatic like I used to be a KGB spy when I was 7. No, nothing like that. Or anything as embarrassing as admitting you're a Coldplay fan. But it's that I used to be quite the EV enthusiast. In fact, my first foray into YouTube was about 8 or 9 years ago, and it was a channel dedicated to explaining how EVs were advantageous. But anyway, it's as cringy as hell to watch it. But my interest in EVs waned. It cooled down, very much so, for various reasons. But one of them was that most other EV enthusiasts who had channels which I watched were all very, well-off, middle-class Americans. Like, yeah, we just got our Model Y, and we're going to get a Model 3 so we can take the kids to school, and then my son's going to get a Model S because his one's too old, that sort of thing. They were a bit out of touch with reality. But some of them were very nice, by the way, don't get me wrong, but there was one thing that they all had in common. They would spread a misleading bit of information which I wasn't too happy with, and that was that EVs were maintenance-free. I'm quoting here. They required no maintenance. At most, screen wash when you take it in for service. And that's just not true. Everything requires maintenance, whether it's a wood-burning stove or your favorite sex toy. Everything that's subject to wear and tear needs some upkeep. And cars are no different, whether they're electric or not. Obviously, electric cars don't need to change fluids and filters in the same way that petrol and diesel vehicles do, but wiper blades wear out, suspension components and bushings get tired and need replacement, air conditioning needs to be regassed, and of course there's tyres. Tyres are a big one. EV enthusiasts love to harp on about all the brake pads. You don't use brake pads on electric vehicles, you've got regenerative braking. But they don't talk about the tyres though, do they? On electric vehicles, because they're heavier and they have more torque going through the wheels, tyres will last less. So there's a maintenance cost that you're not saving. But you can argue, no, even with that extra tyre wear and all that stuff, on the whole, electric vehicles will require less maintenance than an equivalent internal combustion engine car, which is probably true. While then you. You see, many of the first electric vehicles that sold well, your Nissan Leafs, your Tesla Model S's, they're all getting older now. They've got a decade or more. And at this time in a car's life, they require certain maintenance. And that's what we're going to compare, because many 10-year-old internal combustion engine vehicles still have lots of life left in them. And with electric vehicles, you might be lucky. You might get one that's been reliable and that's lasted a lot longer than you'd expect, like the Voyager probes or Cristiano Ronaldo's career. But there are many stories of electric vehicles becoming unusable at an age where internal combustion engine cars still have loads of life left in them. So I know of a personal case, a friend of a friend who told me, so it's worth what it's worth. It's not something I can back up with a link. But they bought a used Nissan Leaf for relatively little cash, and then they had to swap the battery pack, which was a 5-figure sum. Ouch. There's another story on Reddit of a customer who had his Tesla Model S. It was a 60 kilowatt hour battery pack, and the battery pack went. The car was bricked. The car was now worth, in principle on paper, $9,500. I suppose assuming that the battery pack worked. Tesla wanted $14,400 for a new battery pack. And I don't know if it was new or refurbished. And at this point, I would argue that those $14,000 are way above what you would pay in maintenance for the 10 years of an internal combustion engine car. At least I can say so. I had a Volvo for 10 years and I didn't spend $14,000 or the equivalent of $14,000 on upkeep. And that includes a blown head gasket, 2 oil radiators, and suspension bushings. Lots of stuff went wrong, but it still didn't add up to that much. Now, you can also argue that you're not taking into account fuel. Fuel is very expensive, but then again, that's debatable. Now let's go with our supposition that electric vehicles are commonplace. You are a low-income person. You need a car. You can't buy an internal combustion engine cars because they're not commonplace anymore. They're hard to get, they're hard to acquire, they're hard to run. So you buy an electric vehicle, and then a couple of months after you buy it, there's a repair bill that's more than the car's worth. You're stuffed. And you may say, but the same could happen with an internal combustion engine vehicle. You might buy it and its floor pan is made of rust, or the head gasket's blown and the exhaust is falling off. Yes, you are correct. It might be the same thing. And that's what I'm trying to get at. You can't say that electric vehicles are maintenance free. They're exactly the same as internal combustion engine cars when they get to a certain age. You see, you might buy one and it might be absolutely fine. It might have hundreds of thousands of miles left in it, or it might be a brick shortly after. But this is just like the number of illegitimate children that Boris Johnson has had. You might make an educated guess, but you simply have no way to know for sure. Cars are a massive cash cow for governments, right from the moment when they're sold up until they go to the great scrapyard in the sky. Last year, according to this report, this represented 390 billion euros worth of tax for EU governments. First, you've got some kind of new car sales tax. Electric vehicles are the exact opposite. When you buy a new electric vehicle in many countries, in the US, Europe, etc., you get an incentive. It might be a rebate, it might be a credit. It used to be 5,000 euros here. I don't know if that's still valid. I've seen in the States, one state gives up to $9,000 in a rebate, I think. And that's all very nice. But if electric vehicles become commonplace, then, well, there's no need for incentives because, well, they're already commonplace. So they'll be just as expensive as current internal combustion engine vehicles. So that's another advantage they have out the window. Right now, the only people who can actually make use of those incentives are people who are already rather well off, because electric vehicles are very expensive when new. When electric vehicles become commonplace and more normal income people want to buy an electric vehicle and they want an incentive, the government will say, hang on a sec, here's your incentive. And then there's another tax that will accompany the car through its life, which is road tax or whatever equivalent it may be in your country. In the olden days, it was easy to calculate. The bigger the displacement of your engine, the more you'd pay. And transfer to electric vehicles, that might be easy. You just measure the kilowatt output of the engine and you can tax on that. But in the EU after 2007, the government's had this brilliant idea of charging a carbon tax, basically. So the more carbon your car emitted per kilometre, you would pay tax on that. How are you going to do that with electric vehicles? If you are wealthy enough to own a house and wealthy enough to be able to put some solar panels on the roof, you can generate your own carbon-free electricity. That sounds great. You can say to the government, look, I'm not creating carbon, don't charge me more. But if you're not well off, you have to probably buy electricity from the grid that's made with dirty lignite or coal or whatever, and you'll pay more. So again, another benefit for the rich. You might think, no, but governments won't do that. They won't do that. I wouldn't put it past them. Now, the biggest dent in state income will be the loss of fuel tax. Fuel tax is something that's easy to charge because you can only buy petrol and diesel and other fuels at petrol stations. So the government can measure and see how much tax, etc. You get the idea. When it comes to electric vehicles, this is not so clear cut because you can get electricity from many different kinds of sources. You can also use it for things that do not include making your car go. So if you charge a sort of a fuel tax for electricity for people who don't have cars, that's very unfair. So what are you going to do? Now, one solution that I've heard is a pay-as-you-go scheme, pay per mile. So the more you drive, the more you pay in tax. And that does pose some problems, because I see only two ways of implementing it. The first choice would be when you take your car to its MOT, the MOT tester will write down how many miles you have and send that to the authorities. And then there they do the sums. They subtract last year's kilometers or miles, whatever it is, from this year's reading. And then you get a notification with, a bill saying how much you have to pay. But there's a problem with this, because I see many people with loose morals fiddling with the odometer to make the car read a lot less than it would. So this will become commonplace. It's called clocking in the UK or busting miles in America. And so suddenly the second-hand car market will become an absolute nightmare to navigate and get a car with actual mileage on it. The other solution would be some kind of constant GPS tracking. So the government knows where you are at all times. And they'll probably think,
Oh, and while we're tracking you, why not also see how fast you're going, where you park, and maybe even make you a person of interest? Because one night you stopped suspiciously at the side of the road for an emergency wee. I believe I can safely state that this whole taxation thing is going to be quite a mess. Today, electric vehicles are still for the wealthy, even if they're utterly dirt cheap to buy. Let me explain. Being able to live with an electric car implies a lot more than just being able to afford one, thanks to the most prominent drawback of electric vehicles, and that's charging. Charging electric vehicles today is an absolute shambles. And it's charging that's the problem. It's not range, by the way. Range isn't. Because if charging was quick and easy, then range wouldn't be a problem because charging would be quick and easy. You're out and about, you want to charge your car. First off, paradoxically, I think I've already mentioned, there's electricity everywhere. There are lampposts, there are traffic lights, there are all sorts of outside lights and stuff. Every building has sockets in them. Yet, finding a charging point is a problem. When you do find one, it's sometimes offline. That seems to be very common. And then when it isn't offline, you get there and you don't have the correct app or card to make it work because each company has their own system. And then when it does work, it doesn't charge at the speed that it advertises. And then let's say it does work, everything's hunky-dory, and you roll up in your car to charge, but all the charging points are full. So you're going to have to wait, for example, half an hour, which is usually the time it takes for many charging stations to charge a car from near empty to 80%. You wait for half an hour, then it's your turn. You have to wait for another half an hour for your car to fill up. So you'll basically spend your life at charging stations. That doesn't sound very attractive. Most of us have kids to raise, we've got meals to prepare, we've got houses to clean, we've got work the next day, etc. We just can't spend our lives outside waiting for our car to charge, and it's probably going to be something we have to do because that's how we get to work the next day. And to top that all off, in many cases, the charging points are so expensive that it's probably cheaper to fill up an equivalent car with petrol. And it's at this point that all of the EV enthusiasts and owners chime in and say, well, you can just charge at home. Not all of us live in a big house or we can just drive up to the house and park next to it and charge. Most of the population in developed nations live in cities, and in cities, many people live in apartments. And you'll be lucky if you live in an apartment where you have some kind of garage. And if you do have a garage, it's very unlikely that you have a socket that's your own next to this parking spot, a socket that can be metered so you can pay for your own electricity. But then many people, whether you live in a house or an apartment, have to park their car far away from their house, wherever there's a parking spot. So they're stuffed. So there has to be some kind of solution for this. The way I see it, there are two options. One, you invest in charging points everywhere. Wherever there's a parking spot on the street, there is a charging point next to it. But this presents its problems. First off, who's going to pay for it? It's a massive investment. If it's a government, it's billions of dollars and euros and yen or whatever of taxpayers' money spent on that. And then is electricity going to be like at a fair price, or is it going to be subsidized, or is it going to be even more expensive to pay for the investment? If it's a private company, you can bet on it. They'll put the electricity at an eye-wateringly high price. And then you're going to have the everyday problems of just wear and tear and vandalism, and you're going to park your car next to one of these things and you're going to say, oh, I'm going to plug in, I'll be able to go to work the next day. And it doesn't work and you're stuffed. And then you're going to have instances, it happens already, it happens all the time, especially where I live, drivers spinning out of control because they think they're in the Fast and Furious franchise. And usually they just knock down lampposts and signs and that sort of thing, but they'll be probably destroying charging points and exposing wires full of volts out into the open. Yeah, there's safety problems there as well. Can you imagine kids trying to poke sticks into the sockets? The other solution would be the reduction of charging times to a point where you could drive to what used to be a petrol station, now it's a charging station, and just fill up there, just like you do with petrol and diesel these days, and other fuels like LPG, but I'll digress.
Now, there's already technology that says that charging times will come down, the technology exists, but I still think that 10 minutes is too long because petrol stations these days already have like these peak times where loads of people come to refuel at the same time. So again, you're going to have the same effect where you're waiting for the guy in front to finish charging. It takes a long time. You're going to spend hours there again. It has to come down to very, very, very low times, equivalent to petrol and diesel times. Otherwise, it just won't work. People won't be asked to spend so much time at the forecourts. It'll become their second homes. And the problem is charging times coming down seems to break laws that are unbreakable, the laws of nature, namely chemistry. Now, I'm too thick to be able to understand and explain exactly why this can happen, but there is a limit to the amount of current you can pump into a battery, at least safely. And again, this is one of those things where people say, oh, a breakthrough is just around the corner. But I'll believe it when I see it, because this has happened before. You know, massive breakthroughs. Remember graphene? Yeah. How did that pan out? Hello, doggy. In a nutshell, as things stand right now, with the charging infrastructure and technology, electric vehicles will only make practical sense for people who are well off enough to have their own charging point at home. As for the rest of us mortals with lower incomes who have to charge out on the street, then it will be as easy to live with as herding cats. Now, if you've been on this channel before, I may have given the impression that I like my Citroën C5 Tourer from 2010 quite a bit. And as such, I really would like to keep this car for as long as possible, as long as it's economically viable, and of course I don't fall out of love with the car. It's got right now 201,000 kilometers, which is just over 125,000 miles. And because I've seen cars like this go for sale with 400, 500, 600,000 kilometers, I think I can safely say that this car still has a lot of life left in it. But let us assume that EVs become the norm rather than the exception. Internal combustion engine vehicles may become very difficult to run, perhaps because petrol and diesel becomes more expensive as a fuel because it lacks the benefit of mass production, or because companies that up until the adoption of EVs were dedicated to the maintenance and upkeep of internal combustion engine vehicles may either disappear or focus their attention on doing the same thing but for electric vehicles. So it's going to become very difficult to run an internal combustion engine car every day. If that happens, people are just going to get rid of their internal combustion engine cars en masse. People prefer the convenience of either a new car, which is what happens today. People will swap an older car that may give them trouble for a new car, just because the probability of it breaking down will be a lot less, and that gives a lot more peace of mind. So if that is the case, if EVs do become so common that internal combustion engine cars become difficult to live with, we're going to see the mass culling of cars that would otherwise have lots of miles still left in them. Back in the 2000s, various governments had scrappage schemes where they would give some money, it was a four-figure sum, to motorists to junk their old cars, take them off the road and buy a new car. And the logic behind that was very spurious, to say the least. The idea was a new car has a more efficient engine that will pollute less than an old car. I think that's disputable. My wife's 30-year-old AX, I think, emits less than, for example, a modern V8, but that's just me. But then let's say you do buy an equivalent car. The energy needed to make your new car, and then the energy needed to properly scrap your old car so it doesn't pollute and whatnot, creates a hell of a lot of emissions. Our society, our civilization in general, is based on fossil fuels. If I'm not mistaken, I think 92% of the energy that we consume was created using fossil fuels. If I'm wrong, by the way, the number will come up here. So, to save emissions, you are creating a lot more emissions. Now, bear with me, you probably think, what's this got to do with the adoption of electric vehicles? It's the same thing. It's a waste of resources. This is not an environmental reason. It's just simply wasting resources. This car is lovely. It's in good fettle. What's going to happen to it when you throw it away? Is it going to be dismantled and the parts sold? No, because equivalent cars like this will also be thrown away. There'll be a handful left. at best. Now, perhaps one way of avoiding this mass scrappage is what they call a crate solution, where the internal combustion engine of a car is removed and replaced with an electric motor. The only problem is I don't think, well, actually there are various problems. One, I don't think there's a crate battery solution. You know, you'd have to have a custom fit for every car because the battery would go, for example, where the fuel tank and the exhaust system were. So you'll have to have a custom solution. That will be expensive. The batteries themselves, they're expensive, at least for the time being. Perhaps with the mass adoption of EVs, the price will come down, but we don't know again. And unless it's very cheap to convert your internal combustion engine vehicle into an electric vehicle, no one's going to do it. Everyone's going to see how much is it for a conversion. Oh, that's expensive. The car isn't worth like half that. And for that money, I could buy a second-hand EV. So to conclude, we'll say goodbye to a whole load of lovely cars that could probably still be on the road for a long time. And they'll just be thrown away and left to rot. And the only people who will be able to either save their internal combustion engine vehicles and keep it on the road, or perhaps convert it to electric, will be the well-off. The rest of us, well, you're stuffed. You like your old car? Tough. You're going to have to get rid of it. So those are just some of the potential problems that EVs may pose if they become commonplace. And of course, please don't take this as me either endorsing electric vehicles as everything good in the world, nor the exact opposite, because I'm not against electric vehicles at all. In fact, I think they're a rather good idea on various levels. So the mass adoption of electric vehicles with the current technology and economics will suck for one main reason, and that is money. If you're well off, then you'll be able to afford the eventual high maintenance costs. You'll be able to afford the weird taxes that will definitely arise. You'll be able to have the ability to charge at home. You'll be able to drive as much as you like because you'll be able to afford the pay-per-mile taxes that this way come. You'll be able to also keep your old petrol car if you like, or convert it to run on electricity. As for everyone else on low income, well, they'll just have to make do with what they have. Now, we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe petrol and diesel vehicles might not become incredibly expensive and hard to maintain. But as I've alluded to before, there's simply no way of knowing. The economics change, technology changes, perhaps most of all, political will changes. So who knows what's going to happen to that petrol and diesel ban that's coming in 10 odd years. Now, of course, will these things happen? We don't know. Of course, I'm making these outlandish claims that they will happen because this is a video on YouTube and you've got to make outlandish claims, otherwise no one's going to watch your video. But let me also give this small caveat. I'm not an expert. I don't pretend I'm an expert. I just like talking about these things. But in my defense, you will have seen during this video some URLs peppered all over the place because I do try to bolster my claims wherever I seem they're necessary. Please notice that I didn't use the environment as one of my arguments, although I do think it's very important and I'm all in favour of us keeping our planet habitable so we can actually survive as a species. So I think you should make the case for or against electric vehicles without dragging the environment into it, because it's always going to be moot. People are going to say, oh, you get electricity from power stations that are powered with coal and whatnot, which is a ridiculous argument, but never mind. It's always going to be debatable. So I think the case should be on its economic and social and other kinds of merits. And I think there is a strong case to be made. And I also think that economics can be sustainable and be very profitable, but we're opening a completely different can of worms, so we're not going to go into that. So by this point, some of you are probably thinking that I'm some sort of tree-hugging, tofu-eating, sandal-wearing lefty loony, while others probably, during the course of this video, think I'm some kind of anti-EV, petrol-swilling car enthusiast. Well, if I've annoyed people with diametrically opposed views, good. It means I've probably made a balanced assessment of both sides. But to be balanced, we probably have to offer up some counter-arguments. What if we get to the petrol and diesel new vehicle ban and EVs have not been mass adopted for whatever reason? One may be a massive blow to their reputation as a viable alternative to petrol and diesel vehicles. That's not impossible. If you were to ask someone in the street, please give me an example of an electric car, they probably are going to say Tesla. Whether you like it or not, Tesla are the face of electric vehicles, and congratulations where they're due. Tesla really were the first brand to make an electric car that was desirable. The Tesla Model S was both fast and had the range to make it usable in everyday life. And all due respect to the Nissan Leaf, but next to a Tesla Model S, it just wasn't that appealing. They also put their money where their mouth is in terms of infrastructure and made the supercharger network. So even if you think Tesla are a pile of charlatans and it's all a scam or something, you have to really give credit where it's due. They really did make electric vehicles something viable for the mass consumer market. But it's May 2024. Things are not looking rosy for Tesla. For example, their latest product looks like a low polygon render of a crayon drawing of a brick. It costs $100,000. Most of them break down just after being sold. It appeals to a very, very small customer base. They've also tried to foist upon the public self-driving, actually testing it on public roads, and it continuously tries to kill both the occupants of the vehicle it's controlling and people on the outside. And when they actually offered it as a trial, at the end of that trial, only 2% of people actually wanted to buy it. Furthermore, there are board members who are selling off their stock. One board member sold off their stock recently for $50 million. You don't sell your stock when you think it's going to go up. You sell your stock when you think it's going to go down even further. Yeah, Tesla stock is tumbling like boulders down a cliff. So people are already talking about it being on the verge of bankruptcy. Or even worse, with their constant promises and claims, they're also probably going to go the way of Enron. Who knows? Yeah, it doesn't help that their CEO is a ketamine-addled moron who's a fraudster, keeps lying. Oh, we're going to have self-driving, we're going to have a roadster by 2020, we're going to go to the moon and Mars and all that stuff. And he really fulfills nothing. And the little that he does fulfill, it doesn't really live up to the original hype, and it's always very late. So with all this, if Tesla either goes bankrupt or is sued into oblivion, it will probably take the reputation of electric vehicles with it. So you may get to 2025 with a very low uptake on the market. And it might not be that. It might be that simply electric vehicles simply aren't as inexpensive as they should be by then, and it's still out of the reach of many people. So the petrol and diesel ban is going to come into play. People just can't get affordable transport for whatever reason. Maybe because other people are holding on to their petrol and diesel cars and not wanting to sell them, so they become expensive as well. And then the CEOs of rich companies are saying, hang on a sec, the poors can't make it to work and make me even more money. So they'll lobby the government to push the ban back maybe a few years. Or alternatively, come up with exceptions like only hybrids or very low emission petrol and diesel cars. Who knows? It's very possible, but only time will tell. I mean, if I'm wrong, this video is going to age the same way as that Top Gear video did from 2008 predicting hydrogen. So it's the end of the video, and this is the part where it's your turn. We can continue the discussion in the comments. Let me know what you think. I mean, do you think, for example, electric vehicles are a scam? If so, please explain to me why they are, because that doesn't really make sense to me. Maybe I left out other reasons that electric vehicles might suck, or it might be brilliant, conversely. I might not be privy to some information that you might have. Of course, I will ask you to be civil and to back up your claims, but this is YouTube, so I don't have my hopes that high. And if you did make it this far, thank you very much for watching, and please like, subscribe, share, and I hope to see you in a future video. Farewell. Standing on a rock. How cool is that? Maybe not at all, who knows? Combustion engine car might not. F off, lie. Charging an electric is not going well. So yeah, that's again, no, God, I'm forgetting. Bango!